Today we conclude our three-part mini-series on setting. We will focus on non-standard types of sets and explore the setter's attacking options on the second touch.
A setter often doesn't receive the ball in an ideal position at the net to execute a creative and structured attack. Typically, the setter must run to the ball, either along the net or away from it. This means he is not setting from a stable position but must quickly move and stop to have the stability needed for an effective set.
The setter must recognize that moving to the ball is his fundamental skill. For practical training, young players must repeatedly experience every scenario. Only practice teaches them, not the coach's words. Additionally, the setter is expected to constantly deceive the opponent's defense. This brings us to the first non-standard setting technique, the over-the-shoulder set. Here, the setter pretends to set ahead, but actually sets behind over his shoulder.
Often the setter is not in the right position and must set using a non-standard technique. One example is set back to the net. This is challenging and young players must be prepared for it through special training. Practice starts at the wall, using a basketball for reasons we've previously discussed: wrist strength and setting technique. Then scenarios at the net are modeled to replicate in-game situations.
This technique is essential when the ball is heading toward the opponent, and the setter must prevent it from going into the net or crossing to the opponent's side. In other situations, it may be advantageous to set facing the net, either above or below net, depending on the circumstances. These scenarios should be also modeled in training.
This is the ultimate expression of a setter's skill, the one-handed set. Every setter must master this technique, as there are situations in matches where it is the only option. As seen in the play of world-class setters, this includes one-handed sets ahead and behind or quick sets across the middle field. One-handed setting must receive significant attention in training.
Training begins with a basketball. Players are taught proper shooting techniques, transferring this movement to their setting technique. Next, volleyballs are introduced, but players continue aiming at the basket to understand that a set always has a specific target. The key is in wrist action.
Then we continue to the real net and simulate all kinds of one-handed sets. Multiple repetitions are required to automate the movements. Occasionally, we can practice on unstable surfaces to limit the involvement of the legs and torso, forcing the arm and wrist to generate the motion. This reflects the jump setting demands during play. Time in training should not be wasted, drills must be relevant, and one-handed ball control must be incorporated even into warm-ups. Another advanced skill is the one-handed overhead pass. This technique is particularly challenging for young players around the age of 13 who are just starting to learn it. Initially, it may lead to some frustration, but with consistent practice, young players eventually master it. Training for this technique includes drills during warm-ups, emphasizing one-handed ball control. As with other non-standard techniques, we use basketballs to help players develop wrist strength and precise ball placement. Drills are conducted both against the wall and at the net to simulate match situations.
Finally, players are introduced to the one-handed overhead pass. To make the learning process more enjoyable, games are introduced. For example, players engage in a game where the second and third touches must always be played one-handed. Now we address emergency situations. These occur when the setter cannot use his fingers to set and must resort to a bump set or even a one-handed underhand set. Despite these constraints, the setter is expected to turn such situations into playable sets that enable attacking. Having reviewed the setter's entire offensive repertoire, we must also discuss scenarios where the setter chooses to attack directly on the second touch. One option is to attack with both hands. But more often, the setter performs a tip with one hand, typically the left. The key is for the setter to disguise the attack as a set until the last moment, then quickly push the ball downward. Another option is attacking with the right hand, targeting zone 4 across the net. A more aggressive alternative involves a powerful attack on the second touch.
Training for setter attacks on the second touch will be covered later when we dive into the chapter on attacking. For now, we end with a demonstration game combining one-handed setting and the setter's tip. And now, a brief recap.
We began with the over-the-shoulder set, where the setter pretends to set ahead but instead sets behind over his shoulder. Next, we explored situations where the setter must set facing the net or back to the net. We focused on one-handed sets ahead and behind. We explained how the setter handles emergency situations. Finally, we showed how the setter incorporates direct attacks on the second touch into his repertoire.
And what's next? The answer is straightforward. After setting comes attacking. Specifically, we will delve into attack variations and apply familiar techniques in diverse game scenarios.